welcome to Talking Europe on France 24. I'm Catherine Nicholson. Now, we've all heard the slogans, Me Too, or in France, Balance ton porc, Time's Up in Hollywood. It feels like the issues of women's rights, sex equality and ending harassment and violence against women have never been more present. Now, you can probably tell there's a but coming, so here it is. But as the world marks International Women's Day, the statistics show there is still quite far to go. Research shows that tens of millions of women here in Europe have suffered physical and/or sexual violence. The average pay gap between men and women in the EU is more than 15% according to workers' unions. And decision makers remain predominantly male. Only a little over a third of all MEPs are women. So what is the answer then? More laws, perhaps? Changing mentalities? Changing laws to change mentalities. We're going to be debating some of these key issues with our panel today. I'm very pleased to be joined by Spanish MEP Beatriz Becerra. Thanks for being with us.
Nice to be with you.
Now, you're a member of the Committee on Women's Rights and Gender Equality and Vice Chair of the Subcommittee on Human Rights, so extremely relevant to our topic today. Yeah. We're also joined by a Vice President of the European Parliament, Dimitris Papadimoulis from Greece. Thank you very much for being with us. And one of your jobs, you're the chair of the high-level group on gender equality, is that right?
Exactly.
And from outside of the Parliament, we've brought in an expert, Dagmar Schumacher, from UN Women's Brussels office. And specifically, we wanted to talk to you about the He for She project, getting men involved in this issue as well. Thank you very much for being with us. Well, let's start off then with a bit of a general question. Gender equality is enshrined in European treaties. Dimitris Papadimoulis, perhaps if we come to you first. If gender equality is enshrined in the treaties, it's a basic principle of Europe, why are we still talking about this in 2018?
Because we have still a gap between the treaties and the real life. And we have to work more to cover that gap. If we see the papers, everything are in the right direction. If we see the realities, the reality gives us an urgent signal that we have to work more in both sides. Implementing the legislation, strengthening the legislation, but also dealing with mentality, with culture, with the people's mind. Because I think that it's important to change a very conservative approach vis-à-vis the role of women, not only in politics, but in the public sphere, including companies, including family, including also the mass media. Because sometimes in the mass media, we have impressive presence of women, but at the same time, a production of stereotypes very conservative.
Well, if I come to you, Beatriz Becerra, we have, as I mentioned, had this whole sort of campaign of awareness raising. And obviously, we talk about International Women's Day every single year. There's lots of talk, lots of work going on. Does it feel to you like this is a watershed moment? Things are going to start happening?
I absolutely think that we are at the right moment. And things happen when the right moment comes, and also when all the circumstances take to this, as Frances McDormand said, this is a tectonic moment. And the awareness is crucial. In fact, we are now living this moment of taking into account things that we have never had. I mean, in a daily basis, so in our homes and the bars and the schools. And some things that we were not talking about 1 year ago, like the pay gap, that was only something that was on the some specific political agenda. Now it's part of the reality of people. I definitely think that it's important to have that kind of bridge in the walls of silence, and there are many. You know, the sexual harassment has been one, very important one. And once you have the bridge, the light can come through. But we, the public representatives, do have a specific mandate. And I would say that from the European perspective, the main goal is to implement that principled pragmatism that we have assumed as a European strategy as a whole. And that principled pragmatism means that we do have to put in place not only the legislation, but also all the actors that are involved. And for me, the main challenges we do have now are the pay gap, for sure. It's in our hands with legislation and with the involvement of society and companies to end with sexual violence, with gender violence in general, but specifically with sexual violence, and also to eliminate all kinds of obstacles for women to get positions of power, because at the end of the day, it's a power moment.
There's a lot of areas to work on then.
Yes.
Bringing in Dagmar Schumacher from UN Women. Obviously, you liaise with the European Union all the time. We've got two lawmakers with us right now. Are you hearing what you want to hear from lawmakers here in Europe and elsewhere?
Yes, I think in many places we have robust frameworks. We still are lagging behind with regard to legislation in many countries. To give one example, we still have 49 countries in 2018 where we do not have legislation against domestic violence. That needs to be changed. Or we have 39 countries where we are blocking the same heritage rights for girls and boys. Again, something that needs to change. So yes, we have already a robust framework in place in many countries. The issue is also implementation. Are we doing enough to make this happen?
Of course, laws do have their limits, even once they are put in place. We've actually got a report on this issue from our correspondent in Italy. Now, 5 years ago in Italy, the government passed a decree that toughened up punishments for domestic violence and for murders where jealousy was pinpointed as a motive. However, though, this does mean the law is much harder on people committing acts of violence, but those acts are still continuing. And the concept of a crime of passion is still relatively commonly used, despite being outlawed formally in 1981. Natalia Mendoza has been to meet one woman who suffered an acid attack by her former partner. She's now using that experience as inspiration to launch herself into politics.
Her face has become the symbol of the battle against gender-based violence. Lucia Annibali, a 40-year-old lawyer, has been working hard to highlight this subject in the political debate of the election campaign, mainly dominated by questions of insecurity and immigration. She was only narrowly defeated in her constituency of Parma, but wants to continue to use her story to raise political awareness. In 2013, she was attacked by her ex-fiancé with acid.
It was a very dramatic time at first, but after a while I got going again, because I wanted to show everyone that you can put yourself back together, that you have the chance and the right to start over.
Since the attack, Lucia Annibali has become an unwavering symbol of resilience. She has already undergone 20 surgical operations on her face and recovered her sight. Accompanied by her team, she travels all over the country, meeting with local associations.
We have to make access to housing for women easier and support their integration into the workplace to guarantee their independence and to help them find a semblance of normality.
Her comments hit home in a country where 120 women die every year from domestic violence.
It was very moving to meet her, even though I live far away. And it was difficult to get here. I came to see her.
Lucia Annibali will continue her fight to change the attitudes in Italy, where it was only in 2007 that the Supreme Court declared the concept of honour crimes obsolete.
Well, the statistics do show that there's been a decline in the cases of violence against women in Italy, but according to a recent survey, they do still stand at around 27%. So we're seeing a gap there between legislation and what actually happens in real life. Perhaps if we look out from the national legal level to more international, there's something that our viewers may be aware of called the Istanbul Convention that a lot of countries have signed up to but not yet ratified. It's about preventing violence against women. We've got Germany, France, Italy among those that have ratified it. There's quite a broad spread of countries that haven't. It includes the UK, Croatia, and the current EU presidency holder, Bulgaria, as well. Dimitris Papadimoulis, if I come to you first, how big a problem is this if the EU presidency holder is holding back on ratifying what is seen as a very important convention?
It doesn't give a good signal for the European Union as a whole. The European Parliament, with a very wide majority, is pushing for the ratification of the Istanbul Convention from every member state, plus the implementation of the Istanbul Convention.
It's pushing, but it can't force anyone to ratify it, can it?
I think that the obstacles against that effort, which is an effort of a common sense, is the influence of some very conservative approaches from a part of the political right-wing parties, plus the increasing influence of the extreme right. And in some member states, I think that plays a negative role also the official church, like in Poland or in Croatia. For the Bulgarian government, I think that it is important during its presidency to ratify the Istanbul Convention and to implement the Istanbul Convention.
Well, I think this brings us onto that sort of issue of where culture and attitudes don't match up with legislators' intentions. Dagmar Schumacher, perhaps if I come to you on this, a lot of your projects are to do with sort of softly approaching this, working on cultural attitudes, trying to understand. Can you tell us a bit more about?
When listening to the conversation, one program comes into mind that we are currently implementing. It's an EU-UN Women program in Western Balkans and Turkey. And the title is actually Implementing Norms, Changing Minds. And it's exactly, we have legislation, but how much are we implementing it? What can we do to make sure implementation really happens?
Because some people do feel very threatened, don't they, by this sort of thing?
But here is where civil society comes into play. So what we are trying to do is also to do capacity building for civil society, strengthening civil society to really hold governments accountable to implement what they have put in place as a legislative framework.
Well, Beatriz Becerra-Basterrechea, I think you were talking about this before, the people who are behind making the laws as an important aspect. As I mentioned previously, just over a third of MEPs are women, including yourself, obviously. People say that it can be hard for women to get into public life and become legislators, or even that women don't see themselves in that role. Do you think that there is scope for more women to be making laws, and what difference might that make anyway?
I think it's very important to have a balanced situation in politics, because politics means power. And the only way to have a balanced power and to have fair decisions is to have these decision organs really well balanced in terms of gender, which is something very simple. It's very clear. And we are all very happy to see how in parliaments like in the European parliaments, we have this increased number of women, 37% I think now in this mandate. But we sometimes forget that this is happening because we have electoral laws that have included the requirement to have women. So sometimes it's so important to have this kind of political orthopedia, I say, that we need to have the things completely arranged when they are not going in the right way. We cannot wait for the time to come. The World Economic Forum said recently that we need to wait for 170 years, I think, till we get the equality. Can we wait more than a century for that? No. And it is up to us to correct the time coming. So it's very important to have this kind of specific measures in order to have women in a balanced decision power.
Well, just on that score of who's making laws, who's changing attitudes, Dagmar Schumacher, I did want to ask you very quickly about the He for She project by UN Women. This is about getting men involved in sex equality. Of course, 50% of the population are men, right?
Yes, exactly. It's a solidarity campaign on gender equality. It's really asking men to become activists, to speak out and to make bold commitments with regard to gender equality. We have individuals engaging, for example, right now on stopping sexual harassment, asking themselves, am I a he for she? And they can come up with small videos that can be posted on social media. Or we have CEOs of corporations, governments, universities to come up with very bold commitments. One example, a law on child marriage had been changed in Malawi because of the immense support from the president of Malawi and to really take a bold statement on the topic.
So men getting involved.
Men getting involved.
About women being against men.
It's definitely not men against women or women against men. It's doing it together because it benefits everybody.
All right, well, that's a nice positive statement to end on. Thanks all very much for taking part in our debate. Before we leave you, I'd like to take you through a little bit of fake news. We like to take a check on that here on France 24. Here's Frédéric Simon with our latest chapter.
Herons for refugees at the expense of the German taxpayer. This is the shocking headline that could be seen in early February on the Latvian news site baltnews.lv, which publishes information for the Russian-language minorities of the Baltic countries. The news site says in its headline that, in the ongoing negotiation on the formation of a new government, German taxpayers will have to pay not only for the integration of refugees, but also for their so-called harems. The headline is entirely false, however. A debate is indeed taking place in Germany, but it focuses on lifting a ban on family reunification for refugees who do not qualify for asylum seeker status. Political parties are currently clashing in the Bundestag on a partial lifting of the ban, which would allow up to 1,000 additional refugees per month to enter Germany as of next July. These people are essentially relatives, wives or children who, if they qualify, would indeed gain access to subsidies granted to refugees. And the debate in the Bundestag focuses precisely on the limits that should be imposed in order to prevent possible abuses. A debate which is miles away from the harems that were wrongly portrayed in the Latvian news site.
All right, thanks to Frédéric Simon for that check on fake news here on Talking Europe. I'd like to thank as well my guests for our debate today. Beatrice Becerra, thank you very much for your time. Dimitrios Papadimoulis and Dagmar Schumacher of UN Women. Thanks as well to you for watching. Do stay tuned, plenty more European news coming up for you here on France 24.